This is the brand new Traxxas Mini Maxx, and this is the Traxxas Mini ERevo. Is this actually a better basher? Let's find out. The Traxxas Mini ERevo is a car that's been out for quite some time. It's nearly the same size as the Traxxas Mini Maxx, but it has one huge advantage over the Mini Maxx, and that's weight. As you can see here, the Mini Maxx weighs a little over 4 pounds, whereas the Mini ERevo weighs just a little over 2.5 pounds. That's in spite of the fact that the two cars are fairly similar in size. Why does that weight matter? The more weight you have, the stronger everything has to be to make sure it doesn't break in a crash. Is this little car actually stronger than the Mini Maxx? We're gonna find out in this video, but only after I show you some of the other advantages and maybe disadvantages that it does have. As you can see, the Mini Maxx is built fairly similarly to the 4S Max. It does have 1/10 scale parts in it, but some of those 1/10 scale parts aren't quite as strong as Traxxas would like you to believe. And the inclusion of these 1/10 scale parts is one of the reasons why it's so heavy. These tires are also quite a bit bigger than the stock tires on the Mini ERevo, which could help this thing be better off-road. We'll just have to find out. This Mini ERevo is actually a really cool platform. It's built very similarly to the full-size Revo and has some interesting advantages and of course some disadvantages because of that design. On top of some of the design advantages we're going to talk about, this thing also has some pretty interesting price advantages. Right now the Traxxas Mini Maxx is $270. You can pick up a brushed Mini ERevo for $199 that's similarly equipped to the brushless Mini Maxx. Or for $30 more than the Mini Maxx, you can get this VXL, which is significantly better equipped. What do I mean by better equipped? Well, you get a full 3S brushless system right out of the box, and you even get a sealed radio box, which the Mini Maxx doesn't have. It's definitely not all sunshine and roses with the Mini ERevo though. There are some significant weak points on this car. However, they are known weak points, and as you'll see, most of them are fairly cheap and pretty easy to fix. The Mini ERevo also isn't the simplest platform in the world to work on, but then again, neither is the Mini Maxx. Neither one of them can hold a candle to what I think is the simplest mini platform in the world to work on, the Arrma Grom. By the way, if you haven't seen my Crate and Grom video, you might want to check that out later. As you can see, just like the Mini Maxx, this does have plastic drive shafts, and just like the Mini Maxx, to run big power, you really need a center differential, which it doesn't come with. The big difference is that the center differential for the Mini ERevo costs just about half what it does for the Mini Maxx. And that's going to be a pretty common theme here. Because this thing's been out a long time, aftermarket parts are just cheaper. You can get a full set of steel CVDs from THS for this for like $40, whereas the Traxxas ones for the Mini Maxx are $100. We're gonna go ahead and pull out this power module so I can show you that a little bit closer, and so we can get that center differential installed. It's fairly straightforward. We just need to disconnect these drive shafts, disconnect the motor, and we've already removed its mounting screws from the bottom, so it just comes right out. Now, as you're gonna notice, everything on this is smaller than it is on the Mini Maxx, but keep in mind that again, this thing weighs significantly less than the Mini Maxx does, so you can get away with having smaller parts on it. That's not to say none of this stuff's gonna break, but it is an advantage. You can see straight out of the box, we get a plastic spur with a slipper clutch, which is something you don't get on the Mini Maxx. This little Vlinion 380 motor is capable of pushing the Mini ERevo to around 30 miles an hour on 2S and up to 50 miles an hour on 3S. The brush motor option is actually a full 1/10 scale brushed motor, and it'll get the car up to around 30 miles an hour too, which is surprisingly similar to what the brushless 2S Mini Maxx can do. In order to get this apart, we do need to take the slipper clutch apart. Since we're going to be putting a center diff in here, we'll go ahead and lock this slipper clutch all the way up because it's really not needed anymore once the center differential's in there. You can see this slipper clutch has already seen quite a bit of wear. Even though this car was designed a long time ago, all the screws are M2 or larger, which makes taking things apart a lot easier. One thing that there's no doubt about is that the parts on this car are quite a bit smaller, so it's a bit more fiddly to work on. As you can see here out of the box, we have this placeholder for the center differential. You definitely want to have a center differential though. And that's what we have here in this little guy. Now this is a completely sealed unit. From the factory, they usually ship with grease in them, which really isn't stiff enough. So we're gonna put some 100K in here. That'll make it stiff enough that the car is still fun, but allow for that decoupling from the front and rear. If you're not familiar with why a center differential is so important in a basher, it's because it allows the front and rear wheels to spin at different speeds. If you don't have a center differential, the entire drivetrain basically has to spin at the same speed, and there's a lot of situations, especially in big jump landings, where the front and rear wheels really don't want to be spinning at the same speed. Okay, fortunately they don't have grease in here. A lot of times they used to have grease in these differentials, so it's fluid filled, but there's almost nothing in here, so let's get some real fluid in here. I can't find my 100K, so we'll go with some 1 million, and that should be just fine. Oh, and in case you were wondering, yeah, that's a real deal Traxxas O-ring sealing this differential, unlike the paper gasket that you get on the Mini Maxx. Is the paper gasket a problem? Probably not, but it's just a sign of cost cutting. And there we go. That feels nice and stiff without being totally locked up. And as you saw, this is a real bevel gear differential. All 3 differentials will be the same in this car. That's as opposed to the planetary gear differentials that we've seen in the Mini Maxx, which have been breaking. Fortunately, the 1/10 scale bevel gear differentials do fit the Mini Maxx, though to upgrade them, of course, is going to be additional cost. There we go, that feels nice and smooth. Now, is this center differential going to make this drivetrain stronger than the one on the Mini Maxx? I have my doubts, but we're going to find out. And of course, again, because this thing's been out for a long time, you can upgrade just about everything. For instance, you can get all steel gears for this transmission for about 15 bucks on Amazon. One disadvantage we have here is 48P gears. These gears aren't as strong as the 32P gears on the Mini Maxx. However, it does have an infinitely adjustable motor mount, which is nice if you want to get your gear mesh just perfect. Now, before we put that back in, let's take a look at the rest of the electronics. We have a VXL 3M ESC here. This isn't as strong as the VXL 3S, but it's still plenty to power this car. Here we have a real waterproof receiver box. This one's missing the gasket. I bought this car used, but normally there'd be a gasket right here that would make this waterproof. And then inside here, you see one big advantage we get. That's a full TQI radio system. That means we get Traxxas stability management and the TQI remote that not only has a bunch of programming options, but gives you the ability to put in a Bluetooth module for even more programmability. That only comes with the $300 VXL version, but that's something you don't get in the $270 Mini Maxx. Like I said earlier, it's not all sunshine and roses with the Mini ERevo. You do get a micro-sized servo, and whereas it is sufficient for the stock car, it is plastic geared. However, a Savox upgrade servo really isn't very expensive. The other big electronic disadvantage are these battery trays. They're pretty small, but you do get 2 of them, and you can run 2 LiPo batteries in parallel and get quite a bit of runtime on this thing. And being small, those batteries are going to be fairly inexpensive. But 2 of them will probably be more than 1 battery on the Mini Maxx. Let me pull this rear differential out and I'll show you the other 2 big disadvantages. The first big disadvantage you're going to see is complexity. This cantilever suspension has a lot more parts on it than the much more conventional style Mini Maxx suspension, and one saying I've always loved is a part that doesn't exist can't break. But we might just find that this more complex suspension actually works better. Accessing the differentials is also fairly complex, though surprisingly, it's not really that much more complicated than getting to the max differentials. These diffs can be a weak point, but a lot of that weakness can be ameliorated by properly shimming them. You can put shims behind the pinion gear to bring it closer to the ring gear, and that's something you definitely want to do at least in the rear, especially if you're going to be running 3S. This one's either already been shimmed or we got lucky because it feels really good, so we're going to leave this alone. Let me get all this put back together because I'm really excited to see how this thing performs compared to the Mini Maxx. Two things I wanted to mention before we take this thing out for some speed runs is that it is running 2.2-inch trenchers. They came used with the car. They will change the driving dynamics a little bit, but the stock tires work just fine. And out of the box, this body doesn't come with Velcro. However, it is a very common modification, and it makes putting it on and taking it off a lot easier. With that out of the way, let's go see what this Mini ERevo can do. All right, let's see what kind of 2S speed we can get. Not super fast. There we go. Full throttle. That feels pretty similar to the Mini Maxx. Let's give it one more pass. All right, let's see what that was. Okay, 32 miles an hour, not too bad. Let's see how she does on 3S. 3S loaded up. Oh, it's a lot more pep. A little wild. Here we go. Full throttle. Nice and quiet. Give her one more pass. Full throttle. All right, let's see what we got. "45 miles an hour, that's pretty good, especially given that the gearing is just a little bit too high on this right now. Okay guys, fairly similar performance to the Mini Maxx on both 2S and 3S. With these big tires and stock gearing on 3S, we're actually over geared and we could go faster if we put a smaller pinion on it. 50 miles an hour would not be a problem with proper gearing. Now we're gonna go bash this thing. Before we do, I wanna preface by saying we are going to break one of these arms. These stock arms are fairly weak. A set of RPM upgrade arms isn't that expensive, but without them, especially with these big tires, that's probably what's gonna fail here. But you know what? Let's go find out. guys, this thing actually handled pretty well. It'll do backflips right out of the box and is overall very fun. And guess what? That was all on 2S. This thing can still do 3S. Now let's take the 15-year newer Mini Maxx for a bash. The Mini ERevo better than the Mini Maxx? Well, out of the box, now keep in mind this does have better tires, but even with the stock tires, it handles pretty well. Out of the box, I'd say it's a better basher than the Mini Maxx. Even on 2S, it has more power than the Mini Maxx does. It'll do backflips right out of the box, whereas on a normal ramp, the Mini Maxx won't. The VXL version, while slightly more expensive, is 3S capable out of the box. Overall, it's a pretty good platform with easy and cheap upgrades for most of the weak points. It is a little bit smaller than the Mini Maxx, but the fact that it handles better makes it feel like it's larger. That being said, do I think it's a better platform than the Mini Maxx? Probably not. I think in the long run, the Mini Maxx is probably going to end up being more durable. Once you put certain upgrades to it, it's probably going to be a more capable vehicle, and it benefits from many years of advancement. That being said, the fact that we're even having this conversation is really interesting to me. This is my personal opinion, but in my personal opinion, I don't think that this and this should be anywhere near each other. The Mini Maxx should be miles ahead of the Mini ERevo in every respect, and it simply isn't. It is a fine little car, but the fact that the 15-year-older Mini ERevo is even in the running tells me a lot about the Mini Maxx. It seems like Traxxas wanted to cash in on the Maxx platform, so they just shrunk it down, cut costs wherever they could, and then sold it at a premium price. I'm not saying that this is a junk car. It's not. It's a good car. I'm not saying yours isn't going to be a great time for you. I'm sure you'll have a great time with it. I just think it's really, really interesting that this car, that's been out for a decade and a half and is probably about to get discontinued, has it beat in quite a few different ways. Again, though, that's just my opinion. I can't wait to hear your opinion. Let me know down in the comments. Make sure you get subscribed, then check out my previous video for a giveaway.